All Elite Wrestling have announced the return of Blood and Guts, and what's the condition of Sting following that devastating table bump? But first, we have an update on the injury status of a top AEW star. During the post-Forbidden Door media scrum, Bryan Danielson would reveal that he'd suffered a suspected fractured forearm during the main event bout with Kazuchika Okada, this when he was on the end of an elbow drop from the Rainmaker. The American Dragon would then reveal that he's expected to be out of action for 6 to 8 weeks, although it appears that this may have been an optimistic prediction. According to Bryan's wife, Brie Bella, x-rays show that the injury is worse than first thought, and she would write, "Not sure to be proud or chastise him for wrestling 10 more minutes with this break. Definitely worse than we thought. Nurse Brie, ready for action." With AEW All in London just over 8 weeks away at this point, which was the top end of the first predicted recovery time, the latest news brings doubt as to whether Danielson will be able to wrestle at Wembley Stadium on August 27th, with him being a big loss to the card. And before we continue, I just want to quickly plug my first AEW Fight Forever video on the gaming channel, where we run through every video game return in the game, as well as their last appearance. This includes one name that we've waited almost 20 years to see back in a wrestling game, and another who appeared in a WWE and AEW game in the same year. And speaking of injuries, we have an update on a potential secret return of a top WWE superstar. Former WWE champion Randy Orton has been out of action since May 2022, this after undergoing back fusion surgery a few months later. Speculation would then emerge that Randy may never even return to the ring, this after his father Cowboy Bob Orton revealed that doctors had told his son that he shouldn't wrestle again, although he added that Randy will do what he wants. Well, according to a fresh report from WRKD Wrestling, the Viper could be on the verge of a comeback, with him tipped to appear as early as this weekend's Money in the Bank, and they would note, Randy Orton is expected to be nearing a return, possibly even as soon as this weekend's Money in the Bank. Orton has been out of action since May of 2022 with a serious back injury. It appears that fans could be in for a surprise in London this Saturday night, with there perhaps being a spot for Orton's return during or after his RK Bro teammates Intercontinental Championship match against Gunther. But do you think we'll see Randy Orton in London this Saturday night? Let me know in the comments down below. And speaking of Money in the Bank, we have an update on possible creative plans for the show. On the card this Saturday, there will be a match billed as the Bloodline Civil War, which pits the Usos against Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa, this following the Twins' decision to leave the family faction. According to a new report from WrestleVotes, WWE are deciding between two very drastic finishes for the match, with the creative team divided as to which direction to go in, and the report notes, hearing WWE has two very drastic finishes in play for the Bloodline matchup on Saturday. Creative seems split on the decision, in conjunction, and told the Usos and Solo were a part of a run-through session this past Friday at a closed location to go over things. As well as the finish to the Bloodline match, we have an update from WRKD Wrestling concerning the winner of the men's Money in the Bank match, as they would reveal what they've heard as to how things could play out, and they would tweet, while LA Knight and Damian Priest are the current favourites to win the upcoming Money in the Bank match, there have been internal pitches to give the win to Logan Paul. Some feel that Paul holding the briefcase would bring publicity and put more eyes on the company. With that said, Boozer Wrestling has noted that Triple H is against Logan Paul winning the men's ladder match, whilst there's been discussions of Paul feuding with LA Knight after the event. With that said, this is the first time we've actually used them as a source, so take it with a pinch of salt, as WRKD are reliable, but it looks like there's multiple names in the hat. And concerning WWE Creative, we now have an update on how the writing team are protecting their ideas from Vince McMahon. Ever since his return from retirement earlier this year, Vince McMahon has increasingly imposed himself on the WWE creative process, something that was taken over by Triple H during his hiatus from the company. With various reports of last-minute changes at the behest of McMahon prior to shows, we have a fresh report from Fightful Select that reveals how the creative team are trying to prevent as many of these changes as possible, and the report notes, Those that we've spoken to say that McMahon generally likes to make good on the advertised matches if possible, even if they weren't his idea. Sometimes there are some exceptions, however, by and large, if it's advertised, they try to see it through. On SmackDown, there were a plethora of matches advertised on June 9 that those who booked it were hoping to see through. One source told Fightful that advertising matches on SmackDown 1, 2, and 3 weeks ahead on the same show could have been an effort to Vince-proof some plans on SmackDown. However, the main thing we heard he made changes to on the June 5 Raw were match orders, match times, and some quick additional segments. And next up, a secret AEW signing has been revealed. Over recent weeks, Harley Cameron has played a key role in the presentation of QT Marshall's stable QTV, showing up in various segments as well as at ringside for matches. While she hasn't wrestled in the ring since a March episode of AEW Dark, she did recently appear in a viral segment on AEW Rampage alongside the Acclaimed. Well, according to a report from Fightful Select, Cameron recently signed a full-time contract with All Elite Wrestling, this despite not having worked a match since pen was put to paper on the deal. Harley began wrestling for AEW back in July 2022, having worked 3 occasional matches since, this whilst only working 11 matches on record in her whole career, making her in-ring debut back in February 2022 against Scarlett Bordeaux, who recently returned to WWE. Despite signing a full-time contract, there has been no Harley Cameron is All Elite graphic as of this recording, the usual sign that somebody has signed on with the company long term. Next up, All Elite Wrestling have announced the return of Blood and Guts. On last night's episode of AEW Dynamite, the Young Bucks and Hangman Page would issue an open challenge, which was accepted by the Dark Order's Evil Uno, John Silver, and Alex Reynolds, a stable Page has a long history with. Ultimately, a buckshot lariat would be enough to put John Silver away, this before Page checked on if his old friend was okay. This then allowed for the Blackpool Combat Club and Konosuke Takeshita to take advantage, hitting the ring and laying everybody out. Even a save from Eddie Kingston wasn't enough, with Jon Moxley taking to the mic to challenge the Elite to a Blood and Guts match on July 19th at the Boston Garden, a match that will likely see Page, the Bucks, and Kingston take on Moxley, Claudio Castagnoli, Wheeler Yuta, and Takeshita. There's a chance that Kenny Omega will be back on AEW television by then, although that remains to be seen at this point, this following his brutal match with Will Ospreay this past weekend at Forbidden Door. And next we have a health update on Sting following last night's insane stunt. During the main event of last night's episode of Dynamite, a match that saw Sting and Darby Allin take on Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara, the Icon would take a heart-stopping bump that left him in pretty rough shape. The 64-year-old Sting would find himself stood on a ladder inside the ring, looking at Sammy Guevara, who was laying on top of 2 tables on the outside. Sting would then jump onto Guevara, although regrettably the alignment of the 2 tables was slightly misjudged, resulting in only one of the tables breaking, this whilst his face hit into the knee of his opponent. After the show, the former WCW World Champion will address the crowd, noting that he will likely require stitches in his lip, and that he also has a loose tooth from the landing. Let's hope that this is the extent of the damage, as Sting looked pretty hazy after the fact, with him hopefully having avoided a concussion in the process. And before you go, make sure you check out every video game return in AEW Fight Forever.